Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Miraculous Thinking. I'm your host, Elenique Marie, and with me, my beautiful friend, Crystal Ann Compton. And today we are getting into it, you guys. We are starting to read The Search for Truth, or discussing chapters 1, 2, and 3 of The Search for Truth by Michael A. Singer. And I'm excited about this, Crystal.
Me
I'm
too.
excited about this
Me too.
because I really feel like so much of what we were questioning and wondering about in the surrender experiment becomes clear in this particular book, or at least he
Yes.
gives more foundation to how he was able to live the kind of life that he did in the
Right.
surrender experiment.
Right. Yes. And keeping in
So,
mind that he's also a college professor. And so
yes,
I don't think it's written in such a way that most people can't grasp it. I think most of us can read this and totally understand it. But there's like layers upon layers. It is pretty complex, especially compared to the surrender experiment. It's kind of a departure. But
very
again,
much.
this is the book that came of his kind of channeled teaching. Remember, we talked about it, the incidents where he goes to his class that he didn't want to teach, but he's surrendering, and he doesn't prepare, doesn't outline anything, just stands in front of the students and begins to teach. And this is the product of that. This is the byproduct of that, which is
Exactly.
amazing.
It is, especially once you see the intelligence
Mm-hmm.
and the thoroughness. I mean, it's like in 3 sentences of it, there's so much in 3 sentences that you're like, wait a minute, did he just say that? Did those two things just come together? Okay. And then I would reread them and re-highlight it. So yes, super excited to talk about that. And then our next week's episode, we will finish up this search for truth with chapters 4, 5, and 6. And after that, for the last couple weeks of the month of April, we will be doing our little book Illusions by Richard Bach, recommended to us by Crystal's brother. So,
Yes.
30 years in the making.
I know. I was just telling her, I think I purchased this actual book in the 90s when or no, either he gave it to me or I purchased it. And I said, I'll read it, I'll get to it. And here we are in
We're getting
2023.
to it.
I texted him the other day, I'm finally reading Illusions. He's like, really? I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah. He's like, you're going to love it though. That's what he said.
Well, I agree. You will love it. And that'll wrap us out for the last couple weeks of April. So is there anything we need to cover before we get into
No,
this book?
just, follow us on YouTube, give us a like,
Hmm.
give us a follow. Also, we have a Facebook group, Miraculous Thinking, link in the description. If you want to write in to talk to us, we love to read your emails, miraculousthinking@gmail.com. That's one word, miraculousthinking@gmail.com. We love to hear from you. That's all.
Absolutely. And if you do have any comments, remember that particularly YouTube, it's an algorithm. It's something that's learning. And so the more that it sees engagement and feedback from people, it lets it know that you guys actually enjoy the content and find it valuable. And so do we. So please let us know in your comments if these things, how have you interpreted, especially the things we're going to cover today.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very curious to see what your all's feedback is going to be about what we'll be discussing today. So
Yes,
that's it.
absolutely. Well, let's start by opening with kind of the first chapter, which sets up the entire book, which is basically the why of it all,
Hmm.
the primordial question of man, which is why am I here? What am I? Who am I? What am I connected to? What is it all about, Alfie? Which is the premise for this book, because we've been asking this question as human beings since the dawn of time. And I think what Mickey Singer wants to do is help us to find that answer, but he does it in this book in a very scientific way, not strictly scientific, but very methodical, kind of step by step, building the basis, the foundation for the ultimate answer to who it is that we are, which I really, really appreciated.
Absolutely.
With someone like me, you have to start slow. I have to be able to process it as we're going. And if I don't get those first bricks in the foundation, it doesn't really make sense to me. So
Exactly.
he really built it out in a great way for me. With regard to preparing for this teaching, he kind of brings up the difference between the West and how we think and approach things and the East. And in the West, in terms of our search for truth, we tend to focus on the sciences, kind of breaking things down to their most minute state and studying them, looking for patterns to kind of extrapolate out from there who it is that we are, or why we're here, or how the universe works. Whereas in the East, they tend to move toward the inner science or the inner world to find out their place and their position in the world as a soul. And so what he proposes from the very beginning is that we not just focus on one method or the other, but rather not necessarily blend them together, but kind of build a bridge, link the two. Both are viable and both are important, but not to the exclusion of the other. So we use Western ideas and methods, we use Eastern ideas and methods in order to get to this truth. And I really loved in this chapter, he used the metaphor of a ladder and how we're kind of essentially climbing this ladder, ascending, if you will, to the truth or to the answer that we seek, but not to get discouraged by the ladder. And in our case, the ladder could be religion, the ladder could be science, the ladder could be philosophy. And so many of us kind of stop climbing the ladder because we don't like the system. We don't like the philosophy, the religion, we don't, or it's too challenging, it doesn't resonate with us. And so we kind of throw out the entire thing and never make it to the actual answer. And so he's kind of saying in this initial chapter, like, keep what resonates and don't react to the rest. Just be with whatever is being presented. And that will help you to continue to ascend up the ladder to the truth, which I can appreciate. How about you?
Totally. Yes, I very much enjoyed that because I felt that it reminded me of when people had issues when we were reading Neville Goddard and they said they didn't like the language because it was too masculine, it was
Who?
too old. You know, we had some feedback. How
What?
dare they? Who are these people?
Right.
But yeah, but some people had resistance.
Mhm.
Some people had the same issue with A Course in Miracles because it uses Jesus and this
Mhm.
Christian language, right?
Right.
And the same thing with Kabbalion, the Kabbalion. You know, some people had issues with the languaging of Kabbalion. But I think what he's saying is, look, guys, it doesn't matter. There is no perfect system. There's just what will work for you, what you can live with as you explore this path to truth.
Right.
And so don't get so hung up on the technicalities that you ignore that all the ladders are just pointing at something. They are not the way. They are not the truth that you're after. It's just a methodology to get there. And I think we talked about this last time, you know, that some people are like, you have to be vegan. And other people are like, no, you have to be keto. And it's like, they both work. So
Mhm.
does not eating at all. Right?
Right.
It's like, you can do that too. But which way can you bear? Which way makes sense to you? Which way resonates with you? That is your way. And so we have to have respect for our own way, and we have to have
Mhm.
respect for other people's ways of arriving at a universal truth.
Right. And if you make sure that you are in the intention of the answer to the question as opposed to the judgment of the process to get there, it'll be much more enjoyable in any event.
Yes.
Yeah.
Judgment in general just holds us back. I think
Correct.
that's another thing that he points to in this book is like judgment is a tying yourself down to a viewpoint, which means that by definition you have to exclude things from your
Mhm.
awareness, right? So
Right.
that's going to
You
limit
limit
you.
yourself. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, let's get into chapter 2. And there was a lot in this chapter. We talked about identification, which I do want to address with you. We talked about the voice and what that is, and
Mm.
it's a whole lot more than I thought it was.
Yeah.
And then we got into emotions, the chakras and the neurology. And I'm kind of going to shelve some of that for your own reading pleasure. Like, you got to read the book.
Yeah.
We can't possibly cover absolutely everything. But it was just so good how he breaks down how we identify in this world. And
Mm.
in order to understand the reality of who we are, we have to start there. Like, how are you identifying yourself? Which again is the basic beginning of this chapter. And he wants us to tell the difference between identifying with something versus identifying as something, right? And I just
Mhm.
find that so apt and like absolutely applicable to the day and age in which we live, where I feel like we search for identification with groups or with traits, with characteristics in order to feel value in ourselves, thereby limiting ourselves. And so this really got me thinking because a lot of the work that I do when I teach is about the fundamental misidentification of self. And the reason I think, Elenique, that we suffer is because we think that this is all there is. It's
Mm-hmm.
just me in this body, which, by the way, fails me sometimes. It's
Mm-hmm.
just me and my money, which, by the way, I wish I had more. It's just me and my love, which, by the way, we're arguing today. And this is how I'm defining who it is that I am. That is a fundamental misidentification of self. So he starts right there. And he uses two hypotheses in order to get us where we want to go. The first being hypothesis one, we are our bodies. Okay. Second hypothesis, we live in, have control of, and have entered into a state of identification with our bodies. And so I think what he wants us to notice is whether we're identifying as these human organisms in this incarnated reality, or whether we can suss out the fact that we're something more. If we are only our body, and I love this example that he gives, if we are only our body and our body's functions are always working, our senses are always sensing, then we should be in a state of receiving that all the time. However, one example he gave was, well, why do you think it is when you are absorbed in thought or imagination and you're thinking about something so deeply, and then someone begins to talk to you, you don't hear what they're saying? If you were only your body, you would hear that and be aware of that. But your consciousness in that moment is somewhere else, to the exclusion of your senses, which Neville Goddard talks about all the time. Turn off
Mm-hmm.
or dial down your senses. Why is that? Could it be because you're not just your body and your senses? Could it be because you are a consciousness who's pointing its attention elsewhere? He also gave a great example, which was when you say, I am going to sleep, where exactly do you think you're going? Where's your body going? It's not going anywhere. It's still in bed. But your consciousness, you are going somewhere. And we talk about that in later chapters, exactly where you go. You're going into the mental plane, you're going into the astral world, and from there into the subconscious, and then into the superconscious, which he charts out for us. But something other than your body is making that transit. And so it does beg the question, are you your body or are you more? And through the series of examples that he lays out, one by one, we come to the conclusion, I can't be just my body. I have to be more than this. So before moving on, what are your thoughts about that?
I mean, I think it's beautiful, and it's really in the tradition of yoga.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the eternal contemplation, right? That you contemplate when you take on like a yogic path is, and also in the non-dualist tradition, it's like, am I my body? If I lose this arm, am I still me? If I lose this other arm, if I lose my legs, if I lose all of this and I'm still here, this consciousness, then who am I? If I can watch me have thoughts, who is watching? Right? So this is very beautiful because I can see how steeped in this tradition that he is. And he does a very beautiful job of marrying, which I think was his goal, sort of the logic of science, of a proof, which St. Thomas Aquinas did so brilliantly, and so many people have tried to say, if you accept this, then this. If you accept that, then this. And so at the end, we come to a conclusion that, well, then, if you believe and you have said yes to all these steps, then of course you cannot be your body.
Mm-hmm.
That is not who you are. And if you're not that, then who are you? So I thought it was great.
Me too. And I could track with it. I could follow everything. And his examples were wonderful. So once we've determined that we're not our body, which spiritual people, we already know this, but I think it's good to have the refresher. And also in terms of like apologetics, it's great to learn how to explain it to somebody else if ever there comes a time. So he really helps us to do that. But moving on from the body, we go to the voice. And of course, at the beginning of the surrender experiment, we have Mickey Singer talking to, I think, his brother-in-law at the time, having a conversation. And then all of a sudden, spontaneously, he notices the narrating voice in his head. And then he notices that he's noticing that. And that was the very beginning of his spiritual journey and path to enlightenment. So he wanted to get into the subject of the voice. And so when we talk about the ego mind, we tend to think it's just one voice coming from one place with a certain kind of a singular characteristic. But boy, are we wrong. And he starts to break up the voice into its various components, which are 3 aspects and 2 tools. I'm going to kind of share that, and then I'll come back to you because, again, I think this is your area of expertise. Your narrating voice inside of your head, which we all have, and I think the key here is to learn how to listen to it and then to detach from it, but we all have it, is comprised of 3 sub voices, if you will. The first being what's called the id, right? The second being the ego, and the third being the superego. And I know a lot of us have already learned about this in education, but let's just talk about it again. And the id is primarily focused on basic needs. I'm hungry. I'm cold. Or I'm tired. I want to sleep. The ego is focused on the same needs, but at a little bit of a higher level and a more selfish level. So instead of I'm hungry, it's I want a steak rare and a nice martini. Instead of I'm cold, it's like I want a mink coat, right? And instead of I'm tired, it's like I want the most soft and fluffy, beautiful bed, and I want to be uninterrupted. I need my beauty sleep. That's the ego. And then the third sub voice, which makes up the whole voice, is the superego, which I found to be really fascinating. I had forgotten about it, but the superego is essentially society's voice. It is the composite or the amalgamation of all of the voices, especially the voices that you've heard in your experience. And so when you think to yourself or you notice your narrating thought, say, do you really want to take that extra bite of that pie? It's probably an echo of something maybe your mom said to you or your grandmother said to you, or when you're thinking about buying something and all of a sudden you hear, can you really afford that? You really need to learn how to budget. Is that your dad? Is that society's expectation? Like, where is that judgment coming from? And the super ego judges and imposes upon us the mores and values of society, family, and all the other voices that we've ever heard in our lives. And that's part of the voice too. And as I was reading this, I'm like, wow, it's really noisy in there. It's really noisy in there. And there's a lot of different conversations happening. What would we really learn about ourselves if we listened a little bit more, right? Now, there's 2 tools that these 3 aspects of the voice use. The first being intellect. The second being memory. And I think Singer calls the intellect the computer and the memory the library. And so if we need some information, we need to remember a fact, we can go to our intellect. The ego can consult the intellect in order to validate what the ego wants to purchase, because I remember how much I have in my account in the last. So the ego can call upon the intellect, and so can the superego and the id. And then the memory is called the library. And that's just when we desire knowledge, when we desire some information, we can go back into the archives. We can bring forth a memory, and we can even have a visualization of something that happened before in order to, again, validate, justify, and or move us forward in the agenda of the voice, which again is a composite of all of these. And then there's one more part of the voice. I was like, when does the voice end? It's too much. I can't take it.
It is.
And it's visualization. And I'm like, well, visualization, because we associate voice with sound and talking, but voice is more than that. And so when we're thinking about something and there's a narration, there's often also an accompanying image with that. And if we're remembering something, there's often an accompanying image. When we're dreaming about something in the future, we're also often envisioning that. So all of this is part of this voice that most of us on this planet don't even know that we are puppeted by. In fact, going back to identification, right? We used to associate with our body. Now we know more than that. A lot of us associate with our thoughts, which trigger feelings and vice versa. And we think we're those. But what happens when we step back and just observe them from that place of neutrality and notice what they're saying? And then what happens if we continue the journey of that and not just notice what they're saying, but what are they connected to? Oh, that is connected to my mother. That's an unhealed microaggression or trauma. And now I have some space from the place of the observer to heal that. So the way he broke down these thoughts and these voices, I thought was really, really eye-opening, especially because we live in a world that is so overstimulated, causing us to think thoughts causing us to feel things, causing us to access our intellect, access our memories, validate ourselves, project ourselves in a certain way. We live in a really, really noisy, noisy world. It feels better when I know that I am something other than those thoughts. So I'll stop here and I'll pump this back to you. What did you think about this chapter?
Yes. I absolutely, I mean, this is really what fascinates me, right? This
Mm-hmm.
interplay of the mind, and he called, Freud calls it id-ego, super ego, but you also have this exploration of that same voice as parts, which is called parts therapy, right? But ultimately that parts of ourselves get created in these moments of high emotion, and they will be delegated. So it is body. So the body will tell you, what you want. And the superego is society, which is trying to keep us conforming and behaving to the needs of the whole, right? And the egos all want
Mm-hmm.
based on air, I want to be, I want. But even in those individual parts, even in those big headings, there's even more tiny little parts,
Mm-hmm.
and those parts are created through so many different ways. So it's just like an endless exploration of every little time that a part of your main that of that awareness broke off and identified in some way, whether it was 4-year old you hiding in a closet because you thought you were going to get hurt, and so now a personality and a belief system arises and still lives inside of you as that 4-year old, or whether you're a 25-year-old and your boyfriend cheated on you, and now you have that woman, even if you're 50, still occupying a part of you because that was a high intensity moment. And so, on top of the general talk of these individual parts, there's an infinity of individuated parts with stories. And the question is, how can we bring all of these parts back into wholeness, back into the position of the observer? How do we take the charge out of the parts that create the behavior or generate the emotions that create the beliefs, that create a behavior that keeps us stuck, listening to a voice that at the minute that you listen to it with a little bit of distance, you realize is completely nuts,
Yep.
right? You're like, who is this crazy person?
Mm-hmm.
But yet you are a slave to it, even as you are watching it, because the habit is so ingrained, which is what in yoga is called sanskar or karma. These beliefs that are, you've walked them so much, you've done that behavior through so many lifetimes that even as you are observing it, you don't know how to stop doing what you're doing. So I find that absolutely fascinating, and ultimately the path to freedom, right? How
Yes.
can I come back into wholeness? How can I bring all of my broken parts and misbeliefs and take the charge out and just be here with life
when
without
you're
the
when
judgment?
you're here with life in that moment, we would call this transcendence or enlightenment. Is there still a voice? Is it that the voice goes away or that your awareness shifts? This is what I'm trying to kind of lock into with Mickey Singer, because it seemed in the surrender experiment that he just wanted to turn off the voice. But I
Mhm.
don't think the ego doesn't serve a function. I think there's good in the ego, right? And there's shadow in the ego. So when we reach enlightenment, whatever that is there a voice anymore, or is there just stillness? What's the idea around that, do you think?
For me, it's what we discussed with the water eye and the fire eye that
Mm-hmm.
we talked about in Gene Keys, right? The voice is the fire. It is what makes creation possible. It is that longing and the wanting and the hunger and all of it that creates the physical world. And then there's the water eye, which is the place that watches, that wants nothing, is one with everything, is joyful, is bliss. And the place where they join is source of non-duality. So I don't think that there's a good or a bad, but I do think that there's levels. And in one of the chapters, he starts to explore the path of religion. He uses Zen Buddhism and the story of the ox to show the different levels to which we as a human being with an eternal soul go through in the process of awakening, only to return, because it is the journey that is the purpose. Not everything is Maya, yet it means something.
Mhm.
And so I mean, I think these are very deep questions that are obviously only when you have that experience will you know. And I believe that in line with evolution, that knowing always grows. It's always advancing. If source is expanding through our experience of this play within ourselves. I mean, because we're playing with ourselves, aren't we? Like,
Mhm.
isn't that what it is? Source is having a play day with itself,
Mhm.
expressing as all the colors in the crayon box, being black and being white and being light and being dark and being all these different things. And at the end, for what? For fun, right? So it's hard to swallow when you see some of the drawings that we are capable of producing and the pain that this inflicts and that we've endured. Yet if you can go to the place of above it all, then you can see that it actually doesn't mean anything, not really. But that doesn't change that while you're here, you feel pain.
Mhm.
You do. You feel pain, you feel loss, you feel hurt, you feel all those things. And I think we can experience those things while having a perception of understanding that we are not the pain
Mhm.
and we are not limited to that experience, but that we can go to a place above that experience for respite, for healing, to accelerate the process or to ride through that experience in a way that has grace. I think that's what that river that we'll explore later that he says, we have super consciousness and then we have all the different aspects of being a human being, but we do go sometimes. And he even gets into that in later chapters about how and why do people have visions
Mhm.
and know about the future? It's
Mhm.
because they tap into that eternal everythingness. So for me it gave me a lot of hope reading these things. These reminders always give me hope and I'm like, "Oh, I'm more than this. I'm more than this. This is good."
Right. And every time you clear one of these obstacles of self, you enter into a new territory where you're going to have to clear some more obstacles. But I just felt like he handled it in a really great way.
Oh my goodness,
And
yes.
actually, with when we were reading about the body and identification with the body, he essentially says, look at your thoughts. Are they physicalized? If you're living in a material world where everything is materialism and physicality, what are your thoughts? They're real, right? You're thinking them, so they're real. Well, where are they happening? They're not, are they happening
Exactly.
just in the physical? Well, why can't you see
Yes.
them, right? So if they're happening somewhere else, where is that? Which he then tells us is the mental plane. It
Mhm.
also calls this the astral plane. We could maybe even say that's the fourth dimension, that these thoughts are happening, but you're still not a slave to these thoughts. And I
Mhm.
think one thing I wanted to do after reading this chapter in particular was try to gauge how much of a slave I am to my thoughts. How often am I unthinkingly thinking? And the
Yes.
answer is quite a lot. And also, what you're taking in is really important. If you spend a lot of time listening to various podcasts, if you spend a lot of time watching TV or listening to people gossip and talk for no reason whatsoever, you're taking all of this stimuli in, causing you to think, and probably causing you to react and feel from there. And you're not living from the place, that higher place and vantage point of who it is that you truly are. Now, by the end of this chapter, we don't get to that, right? We don't identify exactly who it is that we are as the consciousness, but we are getting closer. And as I said, he also talks about emotions, he talks about chakras, and he charts it all out, and it's great. And so make sure, if you're listening, if you don't have the book, get it and then read these chapters for sure. But let's move on now to the next one, which is, I think, after psychology, what do we have? I think we have physics. That's you. What
Yes.
did you think about this
Yeah.
chapter?
Well, I
Talk
mean,
about it.
I'm a junkie. I'm like a
I
physics
know you are.
junkie. But so yeah, anytime we can talk about physics, I'm excited. But essentially, I love what he did with it. And he kept it very simple and very approachable for people, which I appreciate because I think when people start utilizing physics, they can get very lost in the intellectualizing of it without reaching a point for why are we using this. And so I have my notes here, but he says basically Western science has always been focused on the physical plane. That's what they're interested in, Newtonian measurable reality or anything else like that. And so he says physics tells us that the universe is made up of matter. Okay, that's what we believe. So he says, but then we said, okay, but what is matter made of? Because before we used to think there was matter and there was energy. But now we know, okay, what's matter made of? Okay, matter is made up of atoms. Okay, great. What are those made up of? Protons, electrons, neutrons. Okay, what are those made up? Okay, subatomic particles and on and on. And as you reach the end of the inquiry, there's always some homogeneous something underneath. Every time you look, there's something more that's tying it all together. And finally, with Einstein, that something more was energy. Einstein showed us that energy equals matter traveling at a specific speed, right? So what is energy? Energy is matter traveling at at the speed of light. And what is physical matter? Very slowed down light. Okay? So if energy is the building block of life, he says if everything is indistinguishable, then for our purposes, the entire universe, you, me, the sun, the moon, the universe, source, all of it is all one substance. And that substance is energy. And so if everything is energy, he says and this I thought was a beautiful explanation that he gave. He said, you know how you think that you're solid and you think the table is solid? He's like, but it's not. If you were to really look at it under a microscope, you would see that the bulk of it is just empty space. And then you have molecules like floating in this empty space. The reason something feels solid is because the atoms of it have a negative, the electrons have a negative charge, and the molecules are tightly compacted. So when your negative atom, your negative charge comes towards the table, which also has a negative charge, you have a repulsion of energy. And that's what tricks the mind into thinking that this is solid. When you look at water, which has less, it's a higher vibrational, right? So it has the molecules are looser. You're able to pass your hand through water with a little resistance, but the bonds are less tight. So you're able to go through it. And then when we look at air, you can go even quicker through it. And so what he starts to discuss is the fact that what is if everything is undifferentiated energy, how did we get so much differentiation? How did we get, white pen and, blue thermos and Elenique and, Mars? How did that happen? And we get back to our favorite idea that ultimately what differentiates energy is vibration. And we love vibration.
We
And
do.
I was so happy when I saw that because I'm like, here we go again. Thank you, Kabbalion. Thank you, Neville Goddard. Thank you, Law of Attraction, and everything else that has instilled into all of us, even at a subconscious level. Even the people that are not into this have a sense that, man, there's good vibes and bad vibes. And, there's this vibration. And today I was talking to my husband about this before, because I said, we're going to do this podcast. He goes, oh, what was the book about this time? And I said, vibration. And he said to me, I'm shocked by how many people who are not into anything compared to 20 years ago talk about like the guy, people are like, oh, I don't want to work with this guy because he has bad vibe, he has low vibration and that's going to drain me. And these are men talking. And he's like, we did not used to talk about stuff like this when I was, 20 years ago. So I don't know what you think about that, but how wonderful that we're circling back to vibration. I know you are the queen of vibration. So how did that land with you?
I mean, because it's absolutely true. So it's like we can't get away from it. Maybe we can trick ourselves into thinking that through doctrine and religion and science, but I mean, it's always going to take us right back to vibration, which is to me the energy of the specific thing. I think vibration is the energy of the consciousness in its expression. Okay, so that could be an incarnation. My vibration is how my conscious crystal prime, expresses itself and moves within an incarnation. My frequency, by my way of thinking, is the energy emitted from the way that I move in my life. It's the song that my life sings. That's my frequency. And that's the magnetic part. That's what manifestation is. It's the frequency based on your vibration. And so I think it's wild and wonderful that science is showing this, and that we also intuitively and inherently know this, and that we are shifting the culture so we can talk more freely about this.
Absolutely. And he uses that expression a lot. He said physics, the physics behind psychology, the
Mm.
physics behind psychology. And so in this, he says, all right, so if there is if there is vibration, what is existing at these higher levels of vibration?
Mm.
And we can explore that. And I love how he does this. He said, we can look at that within ourselves. So we can try to answer the question by going within. We can try to answer the question by using scientific research. And we can also explore this question. And I love that he's out there by the people that have extrasensory perception. So people in our society,
Mm-hmm.
yogis, psychics, that can see things that the average Joe can't. And so he basically says, past matter, we enter into the astral.
Mm-hmm.
And he begins to explain that the astral, he says here, range of energy above what is normally detectable by the five physical senses, but below the mental plane. That is what he calls the astral. And he says that pretty much that's where emotions live. But even in the astral, there's a pendulum of emotions, as we discussed in the Kabbalion, right? You have love and dedicate, loyalty and compassion, and you have hate, and you have all these other emotions. So all of that is there. So even within the astral, there's degrees, as we saw. And then when you get past that, you get to the mental plane, which are the things that you can access through the mind or thoughts. And he says that these bodies, the physical body is the smallest one, and then you have the astral body or the emotional body. And then you have the mental body, which is even bigger than all of that. And the aura of a person is what is the interaction between those two bigger bodies. And he says, even in physics, we know there is an energy body that is around every living thing. The more life there is in something, the brighter, which is just an expression of the dynamic of the energy of those two bodies mixing with one another in different ways. And psychics have told us this, and religious painters and religious people, you always see Jesus like in an aura, Buddha is in an aura. Why is this constantly repeated, no matter what the religion, no matter what? So what do you think about that?
I 100% agree. And that's my experience as well. And what I wanted to ask you was with regard to the aura, like conventionally speaking, if I can even say it, because it's not, because this is about metaphysics, the idea is that the aura is the projection of the chakra system, right? So the chakra system within us is projecting out differentiated light
Yes.
associated with certain colors. And this is seen or can be perceived as this larger aura, which is just a reflection. Do you think that's true? Do you think that's how it works?
I think it can be. I'm not sure. I
Right.
don't have like experiential, but it makes sense because he does do a good job when he begins to talk about the search through religion. He talks about certain truths that keep repeating. He uses a lot of Buddhism compared to Christianity and yogic,
Mm-hmm.
Hinduism. And he talks about the seven seals. He talks about the seven candles, that are mentioned in the Bible. And
Mm-hmm.
again, you have this seven energy or lights, and he talks about the third eye. So I think he does make a good case for the fact that energy is being modulated in those centers. And a lot of times we think, well, I'm eating right and I'm exercising and I'm doing this and that. Well, why are your chakras so blocked? Why is your energy so low? Because they're blocked. Why are they blocked? They're blocked because of your emotions, and they're blocked because of your thinking. And we can attest to that. When you're sad, you are low energy. When you're mad, you can have high energy just in the moment, but then you feel drained. So there is a very clear connection between
Mm-hmm.
energy and emotions, energy and thoughts. And I believe that it's probably connected to the chakra system.
I really love the idea of these two bigger energies.
I do
And,
too.
and later on in the book, he talks about plants and how it's observable in plants that they're checking the vibes of
Mm-hmm.
people that aren't necessarily doing anything to the plants, but maybe they're doing something in the plant's proximity. But
Mm-hmm.
the auras, the bigger energy of the person and then the bigger energy of the plant, the auras are communicating. And I've always said this, I've never really had the science to back it up, because I'm just not left-brained in this way, but it makes perfect sense to me that your aura meets my aura, even though we're not speaking and communicating, even though I might not even be noticing you, our energies are absolutely communicating.
Mhm. I mean, you see that with people that uplift you versus people that drain you.
Yes.
Like, you can be in a room and you can go in there feeling sad or mad, and then you talk to a really good friend that has like a positive viewpoint. And he even says this in the book. This is why some people see the glasses half empty, and some people always see the
Mhm.
glasses half full. Because, and he says, the more that you hold on to a thought, and the more you hold on to an emotion, depending on where that's vibrating, if it's high or low, creates a set point for your aura. Your specific aura then hangs out at a certain
Mhm.
place.
Mhm.
And so even if you come into contact with like negative people, even though you will bounce back pretty much to what you are, it even affects the color of your aura for a while.
Mhm.
And especially if you give it credence. That's why they say, what somebody tells you can't hurt you unless you accept it as true.
Mhm.
And then keep giving it your energy and your time, and then it potentiates. And he even says that the psychics in the book, he says, this lady Besant,
Mhm.
who was a
Annie
famous
Besant,
psych,
yeah.
yes, and she wrote that book Thought Forms. He
Mhm.
says that when a person thinks a thought with intensity, it will pull away from the personality, from the main personality, and from the main aura, and it will be its own thing
Mhm.
over here, which
Mhm.
we've talked about so much. And so again, this idea that, where are your thoughts hanging out? Why is the first step of manifestation, what are you thinking? What are you giving your energy to? Your
Mhm.
life is showing you what you're giving your energy to. And or patterns that are so entrenched, like illness, right? I've explored this a lot with myself, right? Why do you perpetuate illness in any way, shape, or form? Lack of wholeness, right? Because what is illness? Not being whole, wholly healthy, wholly complete, right? So why is it that when you walk that road so much, it becomes so hard
Mhm.
to say, no, I want to walk a different road?
Mhm.
This doesn't and then you have to believe it, and then you have to give it energy,
Mhm.
which is the
Mhm.
magnetization of something, right? Like, give it your energy. Sit there and make yourself think of yourself as healthy and strong and vibrant and happy. And people say, well, I don't have the energy. And I can relate. Like, when you don't have energy, you don't want to sit there imagining yourself as truly healthy. You want to sleep.
Mhm.
You're like, I want to take a nap. But you have to, because the only way to change the program is to use that will to create something different. I don't know if you've experienced that in
Oh, absolutely.
for
You
yourself.
you have to create a new pathway in the way that you're thinking and then doing. But you mentioned thought forms, and I'm
Mhm.
starting to geek out a little bit. And it really does speak to the nature of energy, which again I would say is always communicating, it's always moving, and also creating something. And the way that we think and feel, and the way that we are, is creating something. Goddard
Mhm.
said, believing, which is something that you think over and over again as a truism, and being how you're vibrating. That's one thing, right? So that's creating your life going forward. But there's a story, Elenique, I have to tell you,
Mm.
from like the turn of last century. Um, I think it was in theosophical circles about this woman who went to Tibet, and she was intrigued by the idea of thought forms, and she wanted to create her own tulpa. And so she went to the monasteries and she asked the monks, can you help me create a tulpa? Like, I really want to create an entity, a companion. And they said, you don't want to do this.
Mm-mm.
You don't want to do this. And she insisted. And over time and continuing to visit these monks, they finally said, okay, and gave her the tools to create her own tulpa or thought form, which involves pointing your energy and your awareness and your intention, and funneling it into that form. And I would say that we do this all the time whenever we're feeling anything intensely, good or bad. But we can
Mhm.
also do this intentionally to create a form in specific. So she poured all of her energy into this endeavor. And sure enough, she created a tulpa. Not only did she create the tulpa, she continued to feed the tulpa over and over again, sending that same energy. And this tulpa began to develop and was even seen by other people in the area, like riding along with her in a carriage. There was another person, it was a man, and that was the tulpa that she had created. And she was thrilled that she was able to do it. But just as the monks said, You don't want to do this. Because what ended up happening was, over time, even though you're consciously creating something, you're also unconsciously creating something.
Mm-hmm.
And if your set point, as you're talking about, is on the negative side, and you're also contributing that to whatever you are now animating,
Mm-hmm.
they're going to take in that energy. And her tulpa, which was this man entity, started to become very toxic and abusive. And over time, she went back to those monasteries and said, how can I uncreate this tulpa? And they're like, you're in a predicament. And so they
Mm-hmm.
had to help her to do that. But that just kind of speaks to how powerful energy actually is. And again, your consciousness, when you're shifting and pointing it in a certain direction, like that, something's happening with that, with your energy, for sure.
I think that the biggest hoax that's ever been played on humanity is how little we think of the power of our thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
how recklessly we throw away our thinking. And I think that that's really where the challenge is in any spiritual path, even as simple as physical world. Like for any goal that you want, you have to be able to have the willpower to keep the vision on the goal that you want to achieve, and that's just physical reality, right? Like just doing something. But even when you want to take it further, like the spiritual path, that discipline to rein in that thinking, careless thinking, and really to be accountable to yourself for where your thoughts are going, and not to blame anybody, not situations and not things, but really to just hold yourself accountable. That's the path
Mm-hmm.
because of the danger. And I think that's why we don't have the capacity to just alchemize whatever we want. I think that's why we're on earth in training, to train the mind. Because you imagine if humans could create whatever they wanted?
Well, we are.
Or well, yeah,
But I
but
mean,
like
right. Yeah.
really potentiated, like creators, like
Mm-hmm.
gods, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
no, this would be way worse than it already is. You know what I mean? Because even with an unconscious power, look at the catastrophe
Yes.
that we have created, right? So imagine if that were potentiated. And so I think that that's a very beautiful like example, what you just said, of like the power of it. And I think that we don't want to. I think we don't want to see it because it's scary.
Mm-hmm.
It's scary to think that you're that powerful.
Right.
So people just avoid it. They dissociate it, they shove it down into the subconscious, and they're like, nope, I just want to live this 9 to 5 existence.
Right.
I want to go to Walmart and I want to wait to see the hauls on YouTube. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to think about who I really am because it's scary.
This reminds me of another story,
Okay.
if it's okay.
Yeah.
Do you know who Art Bell is? I talk about him a lot. You probably have heard me talk
No,
about him. You don't know who Art Bell is?
I
What,
don't.
girl? Have you heard of
Okay.
Coast to Coast, the radio show, Coast to Coast AM?
I think so. I think so.
So it's been around since the 80s, and Art
Okay.
Bell was the original host of that show. And he was really awesome. And I listened to his archives all the time just because he had the coolest guests on, paranormal investigators and
Ooh.
ufologists and such. But I think it was around like 1999, whenever the Phoenix Lights were, 1999,
Mm-hmm.
2000.
Mm-hmm.
He came up with the idea that he would conduct a consciousness experiment. And at the time, he had millions of listeners every night. Like you listen to him at like 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning when you're up late at night.
Oh.
And so he put out a call to everyone who listened and wanted to participate that they would call aliens into the planetary experience. He wanted a visitation from aliens. And so he suggested it. And on one night, they did it. Like they stated an intention and they all concentrated on it. And within 1 week, the Phoenix Lights. Now, do you know what this is?
I've heard about it, but I don't know too much about it. No.
It's just a huge appearance of a UFO in Phoenix that was seen by thousands of people. Even, I want to say, the mayor or the governor at the time, like well documented, like this huge craft, a mile long,
Oh
went
my
over
God.
the Phoenix area. And following that, like a day or two later, he was scared shitless. He's like, that scares me. The power that we have to just concentrate on an intention and produce an evidence like that. And then
Mm-hmm.
when you add it, my consciousness to yours, and we both have the intention, and now millions of us have the intention, look what happened. And I just think that too speaks to the power that we're working with all the time. And so, like, imagine what we could create if we all got on board.
It is, if we could get on board and if we could be And if we could create from a place of awareness and of a healed self. Because, like you said, you bring to your creations all the aspects of yourself. And we want to believe that we're hanging out over here.
Mhm.
But there's there's a foundation of things that we are not even aware of. And I think I told you that I'm studying this map program, Manifesting All Possibilities, which has to do with uh, teaching the superconscious mind how to heal all the parts, your
Right,
own
right.
superconscious mind, not somebody else coming in there, but like the therapist is just teaching your superconscious mind how to do the work. And the more that I look at that, I'm like, man, there is so much within each human being
Mm,
because there's associations and the mind associates things and dissociates things. Like if I say to you right now, mm, think of tropical fruits immediately.
mhm,
The mind goes papayas, pineapples, kiwis, right? All these things. That's associating. But if I say to you, think of cars and now only think of red cars. Any car that was in your mind that wasn't red gets pushed into the subconscious. And the ego, your little friend that we were talking about, which really is kind of the gatekeeper of what comes into consciousness or what goes into subconsciousness, also has the beliefs or things that it doesn't want to see,
mm,
things it doesn't want to know, things that contradict its own self-concept. So, case in point, uh, super unhealthy, unattractive men that think that they can just hit on like a Russian supermodel and she's totally going to go for it because they're
right.
so hot, right? Because, because it's me and I'm a man and you're a woman. So it's going to work. And you see it at work, right? And you go, wow, man, I wish I had that kind of self esteem or whatever kind of delusions are going on over there. But that's what it does. It says, if the mind cannot accept, I am not a 10 and this woman's not interested in me, it will just go, no, that's not true. I'm going to ignore my pants don't fit, whatever the story is. And you will create a story. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
I see it all the time. And I'm like, wow, you go. Disassociation at work, right? Suppress that stuff. So that suppression, Mickey Singer is going to talk about later, is a lot of what we're going to encounter in dreams.
Mhm,
Because what happens when you sleep is that energy that's going into the physical body and going into thoughts and going into all these things where it's going out when we go to sleep, all that energy gets concentrated into the subconscious. And now it's there. And even there's an ego, even in that. And that's from Dr. Flint, this amazing man that kind of was the researcher. He said, even in the subconscious, there's an ego that's trying to tell the subconscious we're not allowed to look at that either. So there's a story of a little boy that wants a ball, a blue ball in real life, but he can't have the ball. The mom won't buy it for him. But then when he goes to sleep, he dreams. Oh, and he gets the ball and it's great. But then he wakes up and now the need for the ball has been satiated, right? So this ego want for the blue ball that couldn't happen in physical reality is now happening while I sleep. And how many of us haven't had that? You dream of this guy, you want the guy to like you in real life, but he doesn't. But in the dream, you are living in Tahiti, right? And everything's great.
right.
So it's so powerful and scary because we don't even know how many skeletons are hanging out in the subconscious. And we don't want to know. And the ego keeps us from knowing because the ego is that voice that tells you, don't go there. It's scary. And it is. But it's a journey that if you want freedom, you have to be willing to take.
Wow.
Yeah,
So
I
much
know.
good stuff.
I know. Thank
So
you,
is
Michael
there
Singer.
Yes, absolutely.
He's so clever.
So is there anything else in the chapter on physics that we want to cover? Do we want to get to the conscious, subconscious, and superconscious minds, or do we want to reserve that for next time? What do you think?
I think we're going to do that next time
Okay.
because I think they have a lot to
Yeah.
work through here just to process this idea that there are these planes of existence, that there is a physical plane, there's an emotional plane, and then there's a
Mm,
mental plane. And you are all those planes, and you are more those planes than you are the physical.
mhm.
Those mental, emotional planes are creating What is
Physicalizing.
expressing in the exactly. And
Right.
so my takeaway from this was you need to pay a hell of a lot more attention to where your mind is and create a discipline, a ritual, and a habit for instituting controls or check-ins. Like, and that's why I think in A Course in Miracles, they say there's an hourly check-in. Every hour you set an alarm and you check in. Where was my mind for the last hour?
Mm.
How am I feeling right now? Am I feeling good? Am I feeling bad? Am I feeling sad, mad? What was I thinking before this, this set point happened? Because if you can catch it every hour, it doesn't eat up weeks of your life, which is what happens to us. You go, I have years like that. There are years I look back on and go, I was in a wormhole for like 3 years before I even decided to check and see where I was at
Mm-hmm.
and decided to come out of wherever that was. I know we've talked about that
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
in the past. So I think that that's the trick. The trick is creating a system by which you become aware of which meditation can be a tool.
Right. And so he went to Zen Buddhism and he studied one book in particular. Was it called The Three Pillars? What was that book called? Do
But
you
the three
remember?
pillars of Zen, and
Okay.
then he went to Yogananda,
Right.
and he began to study with Yogananda and Kriya Yoga, which I think then became a very strong path for him. And really, Kriya Yoga is that it's utilizing breath, meditation, and in yoga itself, the practices to clear the physical body, the mental body, and the thought body in order to be able to allow the light or the highest vibration, highest expression of who you are to fully express in your physical experience.
So let's end this session by asking you again whether you think enlightenment is, and I'll answer too, whether
Mm-hmm.
you think enlightenment is the cessation of the voice, the turning off of the voice, or the detachment from the voice, achieving a state of being where you're not charged by the voice, maybe passively noticing it because it's always there, maybe, but not being triggered by it, not being governed by it. So, which do you think it is?
I think enlightenment is way past that.
You do?
I do. I think enlightenment is really a oneness and a bliss and an existing in God that is just joy and joining with all things all at once, really just being in the river of life and understanding that you're not separate. I think it's it's such an experience that is unthinkable. I think that what you're describing is maturity,
Mastery.
mastery of becoming aware.
Hmm.
But becoming aware is not samadhi, it's not enlightenment. It's the first step. It's a prerequisite
Okay.
to enlightenment, in my opinion. What do you think?
I accept that. I don't know. Well, but
It
I'm wondering,
works.
do you think Jesus, okay, enlightened Jesus or enlightened Buddha, was walking around the planet without a voice?
You know, perhaps they went back and forth. Who's to
Mm,
say? I mean, because you know how we can go in and out
yeah.
of so you can be, I think, to do the job of trying to act like a human being when you're an enlightened soul, you've got to dissociate from the super conscious everythingness and really kind of play a role and identify with the role, which we saw, I think, in one of your favorite passages in the garden, when Jesus is like, I don't want to do this. This is bad, and that's like physical Jesus. But then there's the moments when he's connected to everything and is able to speak from that place. So maybe it's a game where you get to do both.
Mm,
But then
hmm.
in that reality, you get to choose.
Hmm. I like it.
Yeah, I want it.
All right, everybody. Thank you for hanging out for this episode of Miraculous Thinking. Don't forget, you can write us at miraculousthinking@gmail.com. You can join us on Facebook. Just link in the description. Look for Miraculous Thinking. And we're on YouTube. So make sure you subscribe, like, comment, and we would love a good review. It would really help
Yes.
us to grow this community. And thank you for being here. And until next time, stay safe, stay warm, stay blessed. Bye.